All right, we are live.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever the heck in the world you are. So one and only V, the Guerrilla Economist. And we have the man of the hour, the man who needs no introduction. He's the voice of sanity, the conscience of reason in the alt media world, the man who puts everything in perspective. You can find him at theschillerinstitute.org as well as larouchepack.com, schillerinstitute.org and larouchepack.com. We have none other than Harley Schlanger. Harley, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing great, V. Good to be on with you again.
It's great. It's been too long. You sound excellent. I don't think anybody should be complaining this time around. We think we fixed some of these bandwidth issues we've been having with Google over in Germany, where you are. So, Harley, a lot of things are going on. I guess if you want to title it, I think you nailed the title perfectly. The lies are being revealed, and the world's trying to find out exactly what the heck is really going on here. So, Harley, where do you want to begin?
Well, the false flags and the fake news have just become too much. And the intention to destroy Trump is going to backfire. And the main reason it's backfiring is that there are two reasons. One is that Trump is continuing the fight. And there was something Lyndon LaRouche said to me many, many years ago when he said, "You can't lose if you don't quit." And I think we're seeing a certain amount of that in Trump. But the second thing is that in order to sell these stories to build up toward war, they're just having to go too far. The Skripal case was maybe one step too far. The Duma Syria lies are now being exposed. There's a new interview that appeared on Russia Today, which is probably why they're trying to get rid of Russia Today in the United Kingdom. But it shows an interview with one of the boys who was being sprayed and hosed that, of course, everyone's seen. And he said he thought he was coming to the hospital to get some candy because he hadn't eaten all day. And so the Russians are doing an excellent job of getting down on the ground and finding that there was no chemical weapons. Doctors are saying that they treated people, they saw no sign of chemical attacks. And what's the line coming from the British? Well, of course, they're under Assad's jurisdiction, so they're afraid to speak the truth. Well, I think what we're seeing is there are some people who will speak the truth. There are people at Porton Down who acknowledge that they could not confirm, in spite of the heavy-handed lies of Boris Johnson and Theresa May, they couldn't confirm that there was Russian chemical weapons used against the Skripal and his daughter. And now we're seeing the same thing happening with the case of the charges in Syria. And perhaps soon we'll find out that people will acknowledge that the whole story of Russiagate came from the same circles in Britain and was a lie from start to finish. So, we have an opportunity now to turn the spotlight on the liars and force them to not just retreat, but maybe take their positions away from them, maybe throw them in jail. We're seeing investigations in the Congress into the FBI and the Justice Department. Comey's attempt to come across as an honorable, straight arrow obviously failed because his book is full of so much garbage that even the mainstream media is having to raise questions about whether he's honest. So, liars lie, and sometimes there are consequences for lying. Right. And I think this is the moment where those of us who have stood firm with the fight to expose the corruption of the deep state now have an opportunity to recruit many, many more people into this fight. And rather than take a victory lap, that's what we have to do. We have to bring more people into this.
It's funny to me that Comey's book, it's so funny, Harley, that Comey's book has already flatlined. Yeah. And it's flatlined faster than Michael Wolff and his insane fantasy fiction called Fire and Fury. I mean, Barnes & Noble's, from what I hear from some of my back channels, is they have stockpiles of Comey's book. They can't get rid of it. Amazon is about to have it by 50% and somehow try to get this thing to move. It's a joke. His 15 minutes is over.
Well, if Comey wanted to sell more books, he should have had a chapter devoted to Peter Strzok and Lisa Page's sexting. I mean, the guy is a self-righteous liar. Yes. Who is trying to remake himself as an honorable J. Edgar Hoover. Well, there's no way you can do that. And the J. Edgar Hoover side is what's coming out. And I think the case of McCabe, his deputy, is another example of a problem. McCabe tried to play on the victim mentality. I'm a victim. I was just an honest law enforcement official, and I ran into this psychotic named Trump. And then the Office of the Inspector General comes out and says McCabe is an out-and-out liar. He's a leaker and a liar. You can't get much worse than that. Wow. So I think what we're seeing is the liberals who used to hate the FBI and started defending the FBI are now finding that they're in bed with the enemy and they're not sure they want to be there.
Yeah. It's very hilarious. No matter where the insane left is turning, Harley, it seems that either they're eating themselves or they're having their own ideas, their ideals, or ideology blow up in their faces. Harley, recently we've had a rumor. It's some of it. Some people are saying that it's true. I kind of question it. I think it was Xi and Putin that was behind it, but we hear about the quieting of the rattling of sabers on the Korean Peninsula. This is a great thing irrespective, Harley. Do you want to comment on that?
Sure. I think that's part of the picture. I mean, if you just take a step back for a second, if I may, you take a look at what's happened recently. Trump saying he's going to pull out of Syria. The Russians pretty much destroying ISIS and Al-Qaeda. You have the negotiations going on in North Korea with the Secretary of State designate meeting with Kim Jong-un, which would have been unthought of a while ago. You have these developments, and they're not happening in a vacuum. There is an administration run by Donald Trump, which is actually trying to do things, and he's trying to do them through coordination with Russia and China. So what is it that the neoconservatives and the left has been trying to do to stop it? They're running this story that he's a flunky or a puppet of Putin, that he's being sexually blackmailed, that he's an immoral character. I mean, I found it really fascinating to watch MSNBC the other day, because first they were taunting him for not moving in to attack Assad for chemical weapons. And now what they're saying is, why didn't Trump wait until there was an investigation? So they have no shame. But I think the important thing is that there is a plan in place of working with Russia, working with China, a higher strategic picture that's coming into being that has great potential. Now in Europe, I don't know if you saw this, but there was an attempt by the friends of Macron, May, and Merkel to put a resolution before the EU foreign ministers to support the US, UK, French attack on Syria. And Italy and Belgium voted against it. I think 6 other nations said they won't support it, and they had to withdraw the resolution. So the so-called European Union is not united. No, so I think what we're seeing is exactly the shift that Mrs. LaRouche calls the new paradigm. And the media in the United States is hysterical about it. Yeah. In Britain, you now have military figures. The former head of the Navy came out and said, no one in the British military believes Assad used chemical weapons. Right. You have the former British ambassador to Syria, Peter Ford, saying that this was a false flag, and he doesn't fault Trump, he faults the advisors who didn't figure it out or who wanted the war. So these kinds of statements were unthinkable not that long ago. So you talk about something unthinkable. Kim Jong-un sitting with Mike Pompeo. Pompeo, we're told, is a guy who, along with Bolton, wants to nuke North Korea. So who knows what they talked about? Maybe they talked about Dennis Rodman, But apparently, they also talked about the fact that the North Koreans are prepared to move very quickly for denuclearization. So it's a different world than most people in the United States see. And hopefully more people will start paying attention to what the news stories you put up, what we're doing with the Schiller Institute and LaRouche PAC. The truth is out there. You just have to have a little guts to look for it.
Right. You know, Kim Jong-un, I think his time in college in Switzerland has kind of paid off. I think he's seen the wealth and riches of the West. Now he wants to be some sort of a benevolent dictator, because I think the step is, from what I'm hearing, is not only, number one, denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Because, look, let's be honest, with the North Korea, the way that it is, it could never have been a participating member of the One Belt, One Road initiative. With the nukes out of the way, it gets rid of any sort of political or military instability. And then if he opens up North Korea to the One Belt, One Road, you're talking about $9 trillion in strategic and rare earth minerals and metals that could be extracted. Kim Jong-un could possibly turn himself around and reinvent himself as a benevolent dictator, and he could possibly oversee some sort of rapidity and growth and prosperity of North Korea, and maybe even unification could be possible, Harley.
Well, look at the map. For South Korea to fully participate in the Belt and Road, they've got to go through North Korea. Yeah. And the North Koreans, whether it would be a benevolent dictatorship or maybe they'll change even more than that. Yeah. I think the important point is that they weren't going anywhere with their current model, except to build a military capability to protect themselves in the event of some neocon assault. Now that they've demonstrated that they have developed nuclear capabilities, they can say, okay, look, we want to be involved in a discussion. There are an obvious connection point for South Korea with China and with Russia. And you're not just talking about strategic metals in North Korea, but the whole development of Siberia is another order of magnitude. The development of the Arctic. So, there are a lot of things that can be done to rapidly increase the wealth of this part of the world. Now, what are the neocons saying? They're saying, no, it's all got to be done under London and Wall Street rules. And a growing number of national leaders are saying, we don't like those international globalist rules. And of course, at the head of the class now is Trump, who's saying, we want trade, we want to do things and collaborate and be part of this world development, but we don't want to do it under rules that are being set by corporate elites who don't give a damn about the American people. And I think he's got to be more effective in communicating that that's what he's doing. But if he were to do that, the so-called blue tidal wave that's supposedly going to sweep the Democrats into power in 2018 won't happen. The other problem that Trump has is you've got too many Paul Ryans and Mitch McConnells out there, Republicans who are perfectly content to side with the Chuck Schumers on important issues. And so that's holding back economic policy. And that becomes more dangerous because suppose Trump resolves some of these strategic matters. He still wants to meet with Putin. He just met with Abe. He meets with Kim Jong-un. Suppose these strategic crises calm down. Then he's got the problem that Wall Street can still pull the plug on the stock market, blow out people's savings, and put the United States into a 2008 or worse situation again coming into the 2018 elections. So he's got to move pretty quickly. But V, I was impressed with something. The day after the strike, and within 36 hours, you have this, what do you call her, the Waffle House waitress, Nikki Haley.
Yeah, Nikki Haley.
Coming out. She's like the one who dumps hot coffee on the person at the Waffle House who she doesn't like. But what does she say? She says, oh, we're going to keep our troops in Syria. And we're also going to have new sanctions. And then you have Macron boasting to the French media, he convinced Trump to keep the troops in Syria. And Trump comes out the next day and says, we're not keeping troops in Syria, we're getting out. And we're not going with new sanctions against Russia. and he sent Larry Kudlow out. Maybe he's having Kudlow do the mooch, go out and the way Scaramucci was deployed to rain on Nikki Haley.
Right.
And what happens? Nikki Haley fights back. Maybe Trump should fire her because she's a very dangerous figure.
Yeah, she's reckless in the things she says. Absolutely reckless. I've never seen any politician at the UN, any ambassador at the UN, be so absolutely reckless with the things that they say. She's an idiot. She's a complete idiot. She's in over her head.
Well, remember, she was a Jeb Bush coordinator. She was with the Jeb Bush campaign, and she has this Bush never Trumper, who is her deputy, who she tried to send over to Pence. And Trump just said, what the hell is Mike doing? No, we don't want this guy in national security matters in the White House. So there are definitely battles being fought now inside the Trump administration. Now, they're not clean battles. It's not Trump versus the neocons. There are all sorts of, it's really a mix. It's sort of like a bad California salad. You got too many nuts in there for my taste. But you've got to have clarity on the big issues. Mrs. LaRouche was quoted today in the Russian media saying that Putin and Trump should meet right away. And I think that's important. I think Trump is continuing to have discussions with Xi Jinping. The back channel with Kim Jong-un is working. Maybe it's time for Trump to have a back channel with some of the Democrats who want to do infrastructure with him. But in any case, things can shift quickly, but it's still extremely dangerous. And one thing to keep an eye on is that the British White Helmet Group, this is not a humanitarian group. It's ISIS, it's Al-Qaeda, funded by MI6 and British military. They're saying that there will be a chemical attack in Idlib province sometime in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Well, they know that because this time they're going to make sure there are chemical weapons used. And the Russians and the Syrians are going to have to move quickly to counter that because the line is still out there. If Assad does it again, there'll be another strike.
Right, exactly. And I'm hoping that that will be intercepted and an end would be put to this as quickly as possible, Harley.
Well, and V, there's another interesting thing that I'll just throw out there. You may have covered it today earlier, but the story comes out that Theresa May has a conflict of interest. Her husband's fund is heavily invested in BAE and Lockheed Martin. And they're going to be getting heavy reimbursements for the missiles they used in the strikes on Syria. So perhaps this will come back and hit Theresa May, who really should be ousted. I mean, she's still involved in trying to sabotage Brexit. There was a new poll that came out, by the way, which is interesting, because the Tony Blair types and the City of London types are figuring if they can postpone Brexit for another year, using May's incompetence as their lead for that, the British voters will turn around and recognize they need the EU. In fact, there are now fewer people supporting staying in the EU in Britain. Fewer by far. I think it's 34% from the most recent poll, while the pro-Brexit is still right about 50%. So that's not going to work. So, this is another sign that these elites misread the intention of the population that wants to get rid of them.
Yeah. And that's the case we always see globally. With these guys are always underestimating their opponents and overestimating their own prowess.
Well, and it's because they actually believe they're superior.
Yeah.
This is where you see the mentality of the titans of the universe or the satanic princes who actually believe they have special power to control things. Right. And it's inconvenient to them that there's an alternative media out there which is not satisfied with being subordinates to a bunch of evil characters. And that's why they're trying to shut down alternative media. But I don't think it's going to work. I think it's too far. The camel's nose is inside the tent. You can't keep the camel out now. And
Right.
I think the American people are happy to have an alternative to Wolf Blitzer and poor old Rachel Maddow. I think it's time that also the Washington Post. If Trump gets his way, maybe Bezos will be bankrupt sometime soon before he takes over everything.
Yeah. Bezos and his phony, fictitious wealth. His the numbers on his wealth that are all just basically his overinflated stock valuation.
His wealth creation machine, they're calling it in the Washington Post.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Amazon hasn't turned a profit ever.
But the stock is good.
Yeah, that's all that matters in the fake, phony, fictitious paper world.
Exactly.
A guy like Bezos could be a billionaire and nobody blinks an eye. It's like Elon Musk with Tesla, same thing.
This is where the same principle of liars, eventually it catches up with them.
Yep.
It always catches up with fake valuations. Always. There's never been a case in history where bubbles continued forever.
Right.
And the only question is who gets burned and who gets bailed out.
Right.
And
exactly.
we've got to make sure, preferably before the bubble pops, to limit the suffering of normal people. We got to make sure that the bubble is popped in an orderly way, that Bezos is forced to eat all his stock. Maybe Amazon can figure out a way to make it appetizing.
Exactly. Very well said. Harley Schlanger, thank you so much, Harley, for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us. It is absolutely always refreshing to have you on.
And if people want to see my latest articles, they can send me an email to harleysch@gmail.com. I have one coming out tomorrow on false flags, fake news, and regime change coups in Washington.
Fantastic. Awesome. And folks, you can find his work on the schillerinstitute.org as well as larouchepack.com. And with that being said, CJ, take it away.